Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the MedTech Impact Podcast, where you get to hear from leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of medical technology. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Makhoul.
And we're your hosts of the show.
So today on the MedTech Impact Podcast, we are delighted to be joined by George Makhoul, CEO of Dilon Technologies. George, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on today. It's great to take the time this afternoon to talk to both of you about everything happening out there in MedTech.
Well, George, I know you've been out there traveling around, crushing it, making things happen. Of course, we're delighted to share more about what Dilon Technologies does. But before we get into that, we do like to frame it for the audience. And being the month of women's health, we're going to talk specifically about that and how Dilon Technologies is targeting breast cancer. So what's the big problem in breast cancer that you're looking to solve?
What's fortunate for us at Dilon, our portfolio is positioned in a couple of different areas that tackle issues related to breast cancer. We have things for sentinel lymph node mapping. We have specimen imagers that help with the procedures happening in the operating room. But primarily today, I'm going to focus on an issue that happens to women when they're diagnosed with breast cancer. They need to get a surgical option many times, and they opt for what's a lumpectomy. A lumpectomy is what's considered breast conserving surgery. So the woman will go in to have part of their breast removed where the lump is, and they'll try to get all of the surrounding tissue around that cancerous tumor so they can preserve their breast and avoid having a mastectomy, a double mastectomy, potential reconstruction. So this way people can still preserve their natural tissue as much as they can and also have a curative end result. And it's a tremendous option for women when they have this diagnosis of breast cancer. One of the challenges, though, with it that we're tackling is that in general, depending on the literature you pick up, 20 to 35% of women are going to have to get news that's going to tell them that the surgeon didn't get all of the cancer, and they're going to have to come back in for a second operation. And that is really tough news, because when the surgery actually happens the first time in the primary lumpectomy, there's about a 4 to 7 day window after surgery that the patient has to wait until the final pathology report is in. And that's when they're going to find out if they're going to know if all the cancer is removed, they can breathe easier, or if they have to come back in for a second procedure. And it's a really stressful time for the patient, for their family. As you can imagine, the average person doesn't live in the medical world like many of us do, or their surgeons do. So this is very new to them. It's very, I want to say, unnerving for their experience. And when they find out that they're going to have to come back in for the procedure, a lot of things go through their mind. Now their treatment's going to be delayed. They won't start their chemo radiation. Now they're almost wondering, should I go back in for a second procedure, and are they going to get it all again? Maybe I should consider a mastectomy or a double mastectomy, which is a really extreme position for them, because they initially went into this with their mindset saying, we're going to have just a basic breast conserving procedure. I'm going to come out of this looking as close to my natural self as possible. And now things are going to change. So that's the patient aspect of it, right? One couple areas of it. Then there's the healthcare aspect. So if you think about it, gentlemen, there's a cost to this. On average, it's $16,000 per reoperation. So if you start doing the math on a surgeon who does 100 or 200 lumpectomies a year, and if you're taking, let's say, the basic average, which is generally accepted of 20%, those things start to add up.
And Kyle, like, this is massive, because, we think about the numbers in breast cancer. This is the highest incidence rate of all cancers in women. It's breast cancer. We're talking 30% of cancers in America for women are in breast cancer. So when, George, you're talking about that stress, this is huge, because it's going to be a stressful process.
It's a big undertaking for everyone involved in it. And I think one of the things that patients really do have to look forward to and have to go through this is some of the most compassionate and caring caregivers in this are the breast surgeons. They really do a great job of connecting with the patient. They connect with the family. They exchange so much of the personal information with them, because they want them to feel as comfortable as they can, because this is a disease that does have a high rate of remission to it, but it does have also its devastation as well. So it's a really it's a really strong topic that I think brings a lot of people together across the world. And it's just so connecting, and everyone has a mother in some way or a woman who they know or are connected to that's going to have to go through this or has gone through it. So it's a really powerful area that we need to be able to address. And we're very fortunate that we have things that can address this problem in breast cancer surgery.
Yeah. And, you know, it's inspiring to see all of these innovative technologies too that are coming to market to make these procedures more accurate, provide better outcomes, which leads us to your technology, George. What is Dilon Technologies building today to help solve this problem?
So one of the things that we're going to talk about is a product called MarginProbe. And Dylan actually acquired this technology April of 2020, which if you turn the clocks back a few years, 4 years ago, things were really disrupted in the whole world, right? And that was the very first time, at least as long as I can remember in the industry, that surgeries actually stopped. People were not allowed to go into hospitals unless it was absolutely necessary. Operations were only happening if they were things that were imminent and urgent, and anything else that could be pushed off was pushed off. So you can imagine a company doing an acquisition. Now you have this new technology and you can't really do anything with it because surgeries are not happening. And that went on for all of 2020, and there was some inconsistency in that in 2021. And then 2022 was the first full year where things were going back to a normal cadence. And I joined Dylan in July of 2022. So I'm coming up on 2 years here now. And we learned that there was really good traction with MarginProbe, but we needed to improve it. And this MarginProbe technology, what it is, it's a radio frequency spectroscopy device. So it takes a probe that's connected to a console generator, okay? And this gives surgeons at the time of surgery a very quick, within a matter of minutes, they can immediately determine what the outcome is of the tissue and the residual edges. I'll talk to you about that in a second. An accurate depiction and binary. So what happens is this probe, it's got a 7 millimeter diameter at the end of this probe. And when you've got an excised lumpectomy, this is an ex vivo process, which means it's removed from the body. This probe now, you will take it across all surface areas of that excised lumpectomy. And then what it will do in the machine very quickly, it will take each section and it will say it's either positive or it's negative. And if it's positive, let's say it was on the anterior margin, now the surgeon knows because they've oriented it, they've marked the tissue when they brought it out of the body. They're going to go in and they're going to take a meaningful shave in that area of the body. And when they do that, there's a lot of data, which is why I say accurate, of the quick, accurate, and binary. There's over 15 published papers with MarginProbe. These are level 1 clinical peer-reviewed studies, many of them multi-center, some single center, but overwhelmingly they show an average of a 50+% reduction in reoperation rates for women.
Wow.
So when you think about how you make this happen, right? It's impressive, isn't it? When you think about what that can do, the outcomes, it's, if you're a patient and you're aware of this technology, you are thinking, I want everything thrown at me so that I can have the chance to get all this disease the very first time. You want to get it the first time. And if you're a surgeon, the surgeons who use this technology, they're thinking, okay, what can we do for our patients to give them every opportunity to not have to come back into this operating room and capture all of their disease? Now, do we get it all the time? We don't. We're about a 74% sensitivity rate, which means there's a small portion of the time, around 26% of the time, that our machine may say it's negative, but there's still some residual disease. But you're still improving that outcome dramatically, right? Where we're cutting that down in half. So you imagine if you've got, let's say, 20 patients out of 100 lumpectomies a surgeon does in a year, and there's 10 more patients out of 20% that did not have to come back in for a re-op. That's a dramatic impact to the system, to the costs, to the patient, the treatment protocol. It's really neat.
You know, I'm hearing obviously a ton of value, you know, Richard. I mean, it's incredible, right? To the physicians, the surgeons, the hospitals, to the patient, most importantly, right? Which makes me think about, you know, how you're kind of going to market with this. You know, I mean, Richard, it's just It's always a very interesting type of, you know, part of the business to really understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly, George, when you're talking about the amount of data you've already been able to gather, could you just give us a sense in terms of like the number of procedures that have already been carried out and where you are in terms of delivering this to patients?
Yeah, sure. So when you think about the footprint of this, I mean, we have a rough estimate. There's probably been 20,000 patients at least that have had this technology given to them. So the reach is good. And it wasn't enough when, let's say, when I took over the organization. So we've done a good job of Dylan of expanding our commercial footprint so we can get more of our direct commercial folks out there speaking to surgeons about this technology. So to give you an example, just even from the commercial business aspect, we had single digit number of sales reps at Dylan when I first came over here. And we're now getting right around 30 salespeople at Dylan, which when you think about how that's spread out in med tech companies, that's a really nice coverage area of the US, and we're continuing to expand. So when you think about the reach that we're going to have now for getting MarginProbe in front of breast cancer surgeons, it's dramatically shifting and changing what we do. And even just from a presence standpoint, dealing with the few different technologies I mentioned to you earlier, I think people knew the different technologies. They knew about our Navigator product. They knew about our MarginProbe product. But up until going into last year, let's say at the American Society of Breast Surgery meeting, their national convention they have, not everyone was putting it together that Dilon Technologies was the company behind all these different products. So you fast forward to a year, which was, let's say, this past April, where the next national meeting was, and everyone knows Dylan, and the presence there, the buzz was there. It was really great interacting this year with the surgeons. There's just been so much work that's been done to broaden our footprint in breast cancer, and we're really proud of that effort right now.
That's exciting. And it sounds like you're on this amazing trajectory because, you know, you spoke about how you were almost in this frozen point through the pandemic, but since 2022 and you've come in, there's been some seriously rapid growth. You know, what's the feedback been like from the people who are using this? And it sounds like it's all positive, but again, what's the sort of that information they're giving back to you about using it?
When you look at it, let's give examples. So we've been able to even bring in a lot of surgeons who at one point in time, they weren't sure if this technology was going to be something that could even benefit them. They thought, well, I'm not so sure about this tech. And when you bring them in, you get a chance to have a really deep conversation about the information, the data, how simple the workflow is, and what it can look like in their practice. You start getting surgeons who try it, and they'll take a number of patients to start with and make sure that it's lining up with what they think is the data that they've seen, and things go well. And then what we get back is this caught a few patients that I may not have decided to take an extra shave margin on. And that's really powerful when you even look at a disease state like DCIS, which is a form of breast cancer called ductal carcinoma in situ. And that's very hard to detect. And when you've got the product like MarginProbe, which we've got a couple published papers coming out that highlight this technology in those DCIS tumor types, and it's effectively reducing re-excisions there, that is really powerful. And when we have surgeons come to us and say, this picked up this patient that I would have probably had to bring back for reoperation, it's really powerful for us to hear that information. I'll give you another example is oncoplastic surgeons, okay? They can cheat when they do lumpectomies, right? Because they're really good surgeons. They have the breast surgery training plus the plastics training, so they can take extra tissue, but still make that lumpectomy look like a lumpectomy and not a mastectomy. And the cosmetic output of that looks tremendous. The issue is if they don't get all the tissue and have to go back in, they're going to ruin the work they did on that primary lumpectomy with that nice, all the nice plastic work they've done to it. So even for the oncoplastic, it's more critical to get it the first time. Really critical.
George, you are such a marketer. Like, it's unbelievable because that's your background is marketing, right? That's what you did a lot of it in previously. And it's just really cool to kind of hear how you're leveraging your background to help with this go-to-market strategy, not just hiring the sales team, but acknowledging the fact that, hey, your products and technologies are already out there. All these surgeons are very much well aware. They're already making a measurable impact. Now, how you go about communicating your technology and evangelizing and positioning and really almost rebranding. Your website is remarkable. Everything that you've done since you've shown up, you can tell that you've really helped reposition the company as, you know, this real innovative industry leading business, which is quite impressive. And you know, we were talking earlier, you're constantly traveling around the country, you know, so tell us, I think, a little bit more about your experiences firsthand working with these surgeons. You know, tell us more about how you're working with them to help understand what they're going through and then to help equip them with your technology to, you know, provide these better treatments and outcomes.
Well, it's really important, in my opinion anyway, that leadership and organizations get actively engaged in the field and they go out and they visit key surgeons, key institutions. They try to understand what the workflow is like, what their day-to-day is like, different operating rooms across the country, right? They have different teams, they have different ways they do things. And it's important for, I think, any leadership in any organization to really have a good grasp of what's happening in the day-to-day. So I try to spend time there with our friendly key opinion leader customers so that they can really share their experience and the things that you were just asking about, what they see and what they feel, but then also with new people who are engaging, because we want people to know how much we stand behind our technology, the quality of it, the level of information, the data, and what this can do to change their practice, right? Part of our mission internally is we are about improving outcomes for patients. That's internally for us. When we think about what we do, that's what our employees at Dilon are really centered around. And at the end of every product that we have that's being used by a surgeon is a patient on the table. And everything that we have right now in our portfolio, it impacts a patient outcome in one way or the other. So we want everybody feeling like that works internally, whether it's someone who loads up the boxes to get them shipped out for FedEx for the night, whether it's the person who takes the orders, you name it. Everybody in our organization, they feel connected to what's going on in the field. And I think it's important for that visibility you have. And that's why I spend a lot of time being out there. On top of that is when we have surgeons who are finding success for their patients with our technology, we want to bring them in. And we also want to find ways for them to share that message with their peers, because it's one thing to hear from industry, as you all know, but no matter how you look at it, we're still the industry. Even though our mission is for the patient and the outcome, they need to hear it from their peers. So we really do a good job of cultivating the folks who have really positive experience and bring them to the network of other surgeons who, let's say, may not have had a chance to see how this can work and get things moving from that standpoint.
That's really neat. And the other part, I think, Kyle, you alluded to a little bit on the website, is you, again, are bringing in the patient story. So as much as you were touching on the provider and everything they're doing, I think you're doing a really great job about this is impacting people's lives. And that is the true outcome that you're trying to improve, and you're weaving those stories into this. So I think the work you're doing around patient advocacy is awesome. Really helping people understand how this product helps them, improves their lives, improves their outcomes. What's that been like in terms of the time you get to spend with these people and talk to them one-on-one?
It changes you, and it just gives you a perspective of, okay, when you're not going to get every surgeon to use your technology, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't need us out there to do what we do. So when you go through periods of time and you find surgeons who, let's say, may or may not feel there's going to be a need for an addition to what they do, you meet patients who've been impacted by it, and it drives you to make this larger than what it is. It drives you to get in front of more people so that there's more advocates out there sharing the message and the success of what it is. And we have barely scratched the surface of what we want to do for patient advocacy and outreach. There's so much more that we want to do. It's when you're a small organization like we are, we're about 80 employees globally, and about almost 50 of them are based in the US, primarily commercial. You have a limited number of resources that you can do these things with. So as we continue to grow, we plan to reinvest a lot of what we do in our commercial operation and getting the messaging out to the surgeons and also the patients, so that the patients can really feel like they are informed about what's potentially available for them.
Now, the MarginProbe technology, right? And it's out there, it's in the field today. What does that long-term vision look like for this product and technology?
So Kyle, there are ways to improve this technology that we have figured out. So right now we have a pivotal trial that's underway for next generation MarginProbe. So earlier in the discussion, I talked to you about we have about a 74% sensitivity rate. And what's great about our next gen, depending on how things will shake out in the final data, we won't get to see it until things are done. That can show anywhere from 80 to 90% sensitivity. So what happens is now what you're doing is you're reducing the amount of false negatives. So that means when the device says negative, it'll be more of a true negative, and you'll have less chances that'll happen when it says negative that you missed the cancer. And that's powerful because our goal is to get this technology stronger so that we can make this a standard of care where every time there's a lumpectomy, this is a part of that protocol.
Sure. And what about other treatments? I know we're here talking about women's health today, but when you talk about, removing cancerous tissue, maybe in other parts of the body, do you ever see the margin probe playing a role in other procedures?
Yeah, we do. So when you
Yeah.
look at what MarginProbe is, there was such a large investment in the technology to make it a platform. And there are other cancers that are impacted by the margins, right? Lung can be one of them. Prostate can be another. There could be GYN cancers that can be impacted, and there could be brain cancers that are impacted. There's such an unmet need in those markets. The biggest barrier is really the entry point in the process for this. So really, like breast, they all require a PMA to go through, which, as you all know, being in this space, PMAs are not inexpensive. They don't happen quickly. Sometimes the direction of what's expected to be the outcome can change. And a lot of investors don't like uncertainty as much as even large strategic companies don't like uncertainty. You don't see a lot of the big companies doing their own PMAs, even though they have the cash and the resources to do it. They would rather pay for a small organization to go through that process and de-risk the entire asset, and then they'll gladly do a premium takeout for someone to get their technology. But it's a long road. So for us, we do see a future in other tumor types. I think we have to make sure we have the right pathway to get there and do it.
That's exciting. And clearly, Dilon Technologies has a sort of suite of other technologies that you're bringing to the table. Is there anything that kind of excites you that is complementary to what you're doing here with the margin probe?
So we have other things that we're probably not spend a lot of time on it today, but even in our portfolio, we have another product that's very disruptive. It's called Hemoblast, and it's a surgical hemostat, which for Dilon Technologies as a company, it allows us to work in nearly every specialty in surgery in the hospital, including breast surgeons. And this product is really unique where it stops bleeding in surgery. So when you think about all patients in general, not just women, everyone undergoes surgery, and bleeding happens as a complication in many, many procedures. Depending on the procedure you're in, there's something that's going to happen. There's a lot of costs that are associated with it. And when you think about the types of procedures that use them, in general, certain procedures can use anywhere from 2/3 of them getting some sort of surgical hemostat down to maybe 10% of them getting something that they need to stop bleeding as an adjunct to it. So when I think about the future, it's we really have something in our bag for our patients and for our commercial team to focus on that's disruptive, because there's nothing like it on the market today, and it's highly effective, and it also has great data behind it showing that the outcomes that it solves. So we feel really good about where we're going, and I could talk to you guys for a few hours about everything that which is good, but we don't have that kind of time today.
Well, that's super exciting to hear. And I guess lying ahead, you touched on some of the things that are upcoming. You are predominantly in the US, but you're clearly touching a number of countries, in terms of that global outreach, what's happening, what's ahead for you, for example, for the next 6 to 18 months?
Sure. We're continuing to expand our footprint globally. So we have across the world a really nice structure of international partners that work with us and promote our Dilon products. So we're very fortunate that we have that infrastructure in place and established. We're continuing to expand approvals in other countries for several of our products in the portfolio. And I think that's going to really help us in the long run to make Dilon a very formidable player in the space. I mean, this year alone, without saying too much, we'll grow 50% this year over last year, which is really good growth when you think about the marketplace that we're into. And where our revenues will end up is what most people would consider a highly successful number for organizations of our size. So it just validates the model that we've made it, because I think when you think about med tech and you have some of these technologies that become highly disruptive, and sometimes they're going to be great because they need an FDA approval, whether it's 510K or PMA, and then they need some funding, they need things in place to get those products across the finish line, and then they get them there, okay? But then they have to figure out, okay, how is this going to now become executed commercially to get this in the hands of surgeons? Now they have another hurdle to get through because they have to figure out how the process is going to work to get those products in and used and work. And it could take some time. It's a big investment. We're so fortunate that all of our products have FDA approvals. 2 of them are Class 3 PMA approved, which is a massive hurdle to overcome. And we already understand commercially how to have success with them, what it takes, what the model is. So for us, we're able to move at a faster pace because we're in an execution mode. And that's a great place to be as an organization, when you can just take your business that you have, put the right resources in place, and you can just go.
That's incredible. I'm fired up right now. George,
Hmm.
you're a very inspiring leader here in the medtech space. And we always love to do, some reflection, right? And I think about you, George, joining Dilon Technologies, a well-established company, and knowing that they needed, and they deserved an opportunity to really, again, reposition and reinvigorate that go-to-market strategy, rebuild that brand. Now, what are some pieces of advice, right, from your experiences as a leader, as a CEO in this situation? I'm sure there's plenty of other leaders and other folks out there that, might, have that opportunity or be in a position like you today. What type of advice do you have for them?
I think when you're going into these roles, especially in these C-suite level roles, whether you're in any C-suite level or a CEO, you have to always take on the roles of, okay, am I ready? And you could really pick yourself apart and think about different things that you've done or not done, and you may never check all of the boxes. So it's a lifelong learning process when you're in a role like this. But when you're getting yourself into a role like it, you got to think about, okay, in your career, is this something that you want to do? And if you know at an earlier phase of your career that you may want to tackle this type of an endeavor, then you have to start preparing yourself for all the different things that you may take on. Because if you're fortunate enough to work, let's say, in a large organization that's well known, that's well funded, that's got a great presence, that can be an incredible training ground because you get a chance to interface in different types of facets of the business, right? So obviously you tackle the basics of sales and marketing and management and leadership, but there are a lot of jobs sometimes that people don't want to take on, like understanding how to manage contracts, getting in that GPO in the IDN space, understanding how that works, because when you're a big player in the world, everyone wants to do business with you because there's a huge demand for your product. So it's great to understand that landscape and navigate it. But you don't get that experience when you're at a small company for your whole career, because you're always knocking on the door and people are not going to listen. But then you get a chance to understand how things work. You know who the players are, things pick up. If you get a chance to run a marketing department, I think it's really important for people, because we used to always feel like the marketing leaders were almost like the CEO of the group, if you think about it. Because think about what you're doing. They have to help the messaging out so the salespeople know what they should say about things. They have to help message what the clinical study teams should be doing for, okay, what are the outcomes of our product need to be so we can have the studies designed properly. You think about inventory, what are the operations folks needing to build and prepare and get ready for a launch? What should the business development team be focused on for any type of merger and acquisition? What should the R&D team be thinking about from line extensions or new product development, right? So you start to think about all these different hats that you wear. And I think when you're going to become a CEO, or if you want to be one, you should sign yourself up for varying levels of responsibility so you understand it, and then also try to work in that balance of large and small company. Because I think, how do I say this the right way? It's when you work for a large company, even if things aren't going great in a certain division, other divisions can subsidize, let's say, the losses of what's going on. But when you're a small organization, every decision you make has an impact to all of the, let's say, financial dollars you have to work with, right? All of your operating expenses. And you have to make really tough decisions, and things have to make an impact and matter every single time. So I think if you work in a small company for some part of your career, you get more of an appreciation for the level of intensity that you have to run through and the precision level of execution that you have to hit. Because I think if you're always at a large company your whole career, it does make it difficult to work in an environment where you have to make a lot of decisions and do a lot of work yourself and be responsible for all the fiscal aspects of things. So it's just a totally different dynamic, and you just have to be ready for it.
Super insightful, like, and very relatable. I think about not even just the OEM space, right? But here I am in my day-to-day job with Global Interconnect, where we've been around for 30 years. But the
Yeah.
reality is that it's the same mindset, George, the same approach. I've just learned a few new things today too from you, that I can even relate to my job, and just to think about all the partners too that are out there helping these med tech companies grow and evolve. They too need to go through significant changes after being around for so long. Their business needs to change. And it's really cool because marketing, does play a massive role in that. And again, I just really appreciate your background and those insights in those areas. And I think those are great pieces of advice and takeaways for a lot of the audience, even just outside of the OEM space. So it was fantastic.
Well, even your space, right? There's a ton that people have to understand and go through, right? Because you look about like product development, right? Can you do it internally? Do you have to outsource?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does the regulatory path look like? Is it going to be simple? Is it going to be a 510K? Is there a predicate? Do we have to do a clinical with it? Is there a PMA? And when you're at the leadership table, if you have an understanding of how that's going to work, think about it. Your board of directors and your investors, they can only speak to so many stakeholders internally. So you have to understand how to process all those things together. But even as a CEO, you're only as good as the team that's around you who can really help support you with all of those different functional areas. So either A, you have to be familiar with most of it, or you have to get a really good team around you who can really help button up things so that when you have information, you feel really protected about your strategy and everyone's confident about the direction going forward. So your space ties right into all of that.
Hell yeah. I would love it.
That is such well-rounded advice. And like you mentioned a couple of things there. I mean, I think you touched on the mental fortitude, the aspects of communication I always talk about here with our startups that we have coming through our programs. We're all in this game of communication. And clearly that succinct messaging that you're sharing with your team is a huge part of that, which makes me think about the bigger vision. You come into this, you're clearly setting a big mission statement for the team. What is that message internally and externally that you're saying, hey, this is the journey we're going on. This is where we want to position Dilon Technologies in 5 years' time.
So our goal is to find ways to impact surgical outcomes. That's what we want to do. So when you look at where Dilon was when I got here, we were breast focused only. A short time after, we became surgically focused in conjunction with this. So when I describe what is Dilon Technologies, this is a women's healthcare company that is expanding into biosurgery, where now as we look to think about what we're going to do in this organization, whether it's things that we're going to develop internally or things that we're going to either license or acquire from a technology standpoint, we want to have things that actually impact an outcome in some way, right? We're not really in the business of trying to find things that are a commodity where there's a race to the bottom of who can sell the same product at the lowest cost, right? We want to provide things for our hospitals, the caregivers, where it's affordable, but it's high quality and it's high impact. That's where we're headed and what we're going to be focusing our company's direction on.
And you know what? I'm sure a lot of people are probably going to want to get in touch with you, George. And a lot of customers, a lot of clinicians, physicians, surgeons. I mean, this is exciting stuff. So how do they get in touch with you and Dilon Technologies?
So I think if you go to our website, www.dilon.com, DILON.com, you can find everything you want to know about our organization that's there. And then info@dilon.com is another way to get in touch with us. So there's really good opportunity to take a look at what we have going on, all the resources available to us.
Well, George, this has been fantastic. We have packed a lot into a short space of time. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing everything you're doing. Naturally wishing you well in the next steps. And maybe we'll have to get you back on and share about some more of that exciting progress you touched on earlier.
That's great. Well, I appreciate the platform and the opportunity. I enjoyed the conversation and the back and forth. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, another huge thank you to George Makhoul, CEO of Dilon Technologies. And thank you for tuning into another episode of the MedTech Impact Podcast. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn. Until next time, keep innovating.